This is Autoline This Week, the show that gets you inside the global automotive industry. Autoline This Week partnered with the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit to produce this episode.
Hi, I'm John McElroy, and welcome to Autoline This Week. Today's topic, cybersecurity. Cybersecurity in the automotive industry. We're actually coming to you today from downtown Detroit at the Auto ISAC annual conference. What's an Auto ISAC? We'll get into that in a minute. But let me introduce to you today the three cybersecurity experts that I've got on my panel. Sitting next to me is Al Adams from General Motors. Next to him is Robert Kaster from Robert Bosch. And next to him is Stephen McKnight from Stellantis. And thanks for joining me on the panel today. Al, let me start with you just to get the conversation going. The public's very aware of cybersecurity attacks, ransomware attacks. We've seen hospitals shut down. We've seen an oil energy company shut down. We've seen all kinds of things. Now I want to know what's going on in the automotive industry. How bad is it out there?
I appreciate this, John. And it's a great opportunity to talk to you on this topic. As it relates to the automotive industry, certainly we've seen attacks and threat actors impact especially IT systems of companies. We've seen some activity in OT systems as well, in the manufacturing systems. We haven't seen a lot in the product space. However, what we always prescribe to is a mindset of not if, but when. So we are always on the lookout for that threat that might come into our space, putting in place the security controls, the requirements, the incident response plans and processes and playbooks, and being able to respond when that time comes. So that's what we are doing as an industry today.
Okay, Stephen, same question. You're with Stellantis, car company. Maybe we haven't seen as many attacks on cars because not as many of them are connected. But the industry is going to connected cars. How do you assess the threat?
We've had connected cars for 25 years. We've learned from some of the past, occurrences. There's controls that we have outside of the car that actually helps limit against the connected attack, as well as controls activated on devices that provide Bluetooth cellular. We are constantly looking at this. We're engaged from concept and responsible all the way through to disposal of that vehicle. So when it comes down to this, as Al mentioned, we are on the ready. We're interacting with our business teams as to what new use cases they want to bring into the automobile, and we're thinking about this and working actively to put the appropriate controls in place.
I think one of the big things that we're doing at the Auto ISAC too is to work through some of what the ideal case would be when we have a real cyber incident. How do we want to perform, or what do we want to do? And we're working through the hard questions and building trust and a relationship so that we can, when there is an issue, that we know the right people, we have the processes worked out internally for how to communicate with our customers or our competitors, our suppliers, and to treat it as an industry as a whole rather than as a company all by themselves.
So Robert, going deeper into that, Auto ISAC, Information Sharing and Assessment Center is what ISAC stands for. Now there's an Auto ISAC, but what the heck is it?
It's specifically targeted towards security issues that we see in the automobile sector. And if you have an issue that happens inside the car, ideally what we would want to do would be that the company that's affected could be working on it, checking with some of our other partners and saying, do you see this? Is this something that you're seeing as well? And try to figure out quickly what's going on and come up with a fix for it and roll it out. That's I think our end goal is to have that trust so that we treat it as an industry rather than as an individual company.
So Al, what Robert's saying here, if I understand correctly, is the auto industry, automakers and suppliers are getting together because this threat is big enough and no one of them is going to be able to solve this issue on its own. It's as I said, information sharing and assessment. So it sounds like everybody in the industry, or certainly a lot of companies in the industry, are getting together on this.
Absolutely, and in fact, what you'll hear in the ISAC is the phrase, an attack on one is an attack on all. And there's strength in our numbers as Bob indicated, having the opportunity to get together like this, build the relationships, build the trust to be able to share information, to share our threat assessments, to share our responses to incidences when they've happened is extremely powerful. And what we're continuing to do in this forum is to develop even earlier understanding how we can pool threat assessment information, both tactics and techniques, to pool collectively better solutions for our electrical components and systems.
Stephen, go into a little detail. I mean, how do you guys work together? Can you give it, Al sort of gave us the broad view. Can you give us more specifics?
Yeah, so obviously the competitive landscape from a business perspective, we are competitors, right? GM, Stellantis, all the others are competitors. Same with the supply base. But the thing is that cyber isn't something that we can ignore, and it's not something that there's enough capacity, people educated to do this on our own. So the information sharing, this event, being with 200 people post-COVID, having face-to-face conversations is fantastic because it brings that human touch back to it, and it makes it so that we can pick up the phone, have further conversations. Auto ISAC, we meet multiple times a week with different forums and events, and the information is always flowing through that activity. So it's great to be here and to be in person on this right now.
And there's a lot of, I think, reuse too between components and software modules, between a module for, say, GM and one at Stellantis. It might not be 100% identical, but if there's, say, a Bluetooth issue, that it could be something that affects not just one single supplier, one single customer in the same way. It could be something that's very broad across the industry. So by attacking it together, we can learn from each other and work on it together.
Robert Bosch company that you work for deals with every single automaker in the world, I think, as the world's largest supplier. Mm-hmm. How's that go? How do you work together specifically when you get to an issue like cyber?
Yeah, so I think probably each company probably deals with it a little bit differently. We tend to be more focused on the product specific area, but we do have regular meetings where we're aligning with the product security officers for the different divisions. We have alignment internally with, say, a GM team or a Stellantis team, where we're trying to be aware of what's going on for the products that we're doing for a certain customer, and we treat it in the same way. And I think that we use the Auto ISAC also as another way that we can share information and get feedback from, say, other companies trying to do the same thing, to make sure that we're benchmarked and not way off on our approach.
Al, same question in reverse. General Motors works with just about every supplier that's out there. How do you work with your suppliers to ensure that they are working on things vis-a-vis cybersecurity?
It's much like Bob described, in which our security experts are providing requirements as it relates to the security controls that we've defined for a given vehicle, given application, a connected vehicle, for instance. We have security controls that we define in our requirements, and we provide them to our suppliers. From there, we meet with our suppliers to review their designs, to review their implementations, understand their testing. So that constant touch point, that constant meeting with our suppliers is key. For a big supplier like Bosch, we also have quarterly meetings where we talk about cybersecurity, not just for the components and the systems that are in implementation, but strategically, bigger picture, what's going on for our companies as we work together and relate together. So there are general touch points like that one, the quarterly meetups, and then there are specific meetings, workshops, peer reviews, design reviews, etc.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, how do you keep track of all this? I mean, there's thousands of parts that go into a car that come from hundreds, if not even more than that, number of suppliers. All those chips, all that software on it, it would seem to me that, boy, there could be a lot of leaks coming in that way.
Yeah, so we deal with this through relationship. Okay, so there's a small, relatively number of cyber-focused individuals at any one OEM. And my cybersecurity experts are interacting with the design release engineer. That's the primary person between the OEM and the supplier. Okay, so there's that relationship. As Al mentioned, in contract, a whole list of requirements which are then reviewed, and the design is reviewed, the implementation. But it's that relationship of my cyber experts working with those design release engineers to then work with the supplier. And then it's the cyber community on top of that that's talking between companies to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
I think cybersecurity is also it's a little bit softer, maybe a different type of goal that you have. So in the braking world, we can go out to the test track, drive 60 miles an hour on dry pavement and stop in 23.2 meters and say that, okay, we passed that test. We do it 5 times and every time it works and we can say, okay, we're good. But with cybersecurity, it's a little bit fuzzier for what you're trying to do, and you're trying to prevent something from happening rather than reach a specific goal.
Is that what the Auto ISAC part of it is about, is establishing standards, establishing procedures?
I think we would say that we share how we're trying to do it and an approach and build consensus. There's an ISO SAE joint project at the ISO 21434 that just came out a month ago or so, and that's more of a standard for how to approach security from the automotive perspective.
In fact, we have best practices that we're developing as we work together. And what you really want to do is not be overly prescriptive, because there is a diversity in our vehicles and our electrical systems that is actually risk mitigation. It's security by diversity, such that each vehicle instance or each electrical architecture instance might be different. So that element of standards making is important to realize, that we should not be overly prescriptive. Have the right best practices, the right security control concepts in mind, and implement them, but they might be implemented differently but still achieve the same result.
Stephen, though, doesn't Europe have more established procedures? And could you go into that then?
Sure. So in the US, we've got NHTSA, and the way they've governed over the last several years is kind of make sure your product is secure and then be ready to respond and remediate. The UN ECE, part of the global safety regulation that's coming out of Europe right now, along with South Korea and Japan, they're all following the UN ECE. R155 is a regulation that says security needs to be there from concept through disposal of that vehicle. So there isn't a minute in that vehicle's life cycle where we may ignore security. The way Europe is doing it, a little bit different than NHTSA here, is that the vehicle has to go through what's called type approval. It needs to be approved before it can be sold or even registered with license. So very similar, though, when you look at the entire details between the two. They're fairly similar, and we build cars for the globe, and therefore we're trying to definitely meet those standards, but we also recognize that a vehicle lasts 13 to 20 years on average. So the challenge is, what is the threat environment going to look like 15 years from now, and how do we deal with that? So things like over-the-air updates, very popular, coming into play. That is not necessarily a cybersecurity element, but it's a way to deploy the fixes on a fast and broad perspective without impacting the customer. You know, taking them away from their vehicle, going over the air and updating is one of the levers that we're trying to use.
So walk me through the process here. There's a cyber threat. What happens? Alarms go off, red lights start flashing, it's DEFCON 5, or tell me, what do you guys go through when you discover this?
So I can take you through a little scenario of this. Luckily, most of our information comes through researchers. So both GM and Stellantis have a responsible disclosure program. You can report to your dealer your car is not acting properly. You can call our 800 number. You can post via email, and then you can go to our responsible disclosure websites and give us information. And that way, the researcher or the person is protected in one way, and we receive the information and can start that dialogue. DEFCON 5 could happen. However, we've been fortunate to this point where, the call comes in, we start the investigation. And we start the investigation with those same security engineers that were there during design. And what does this vehicle look like? What controls do we have in place? And how possibly could one of those controls have failed? Or a new threat scenario has developed, and we've got to take that into consideration, because a vehicle that's 10 years old may not, in that case, have another layer of defense. And we really look at this as security in layers as well. So when one vulnerability pops up, hopefully there's another control in place that makes it more difficult to actually render the vehicle where there's an observable problem with it.
And we've had a couple responsible disclosure, vulnerability disclosure workshops within the Auto ISAC, and I think a lot of the companies have that. I mean, suppliers also. So.
Go into that a little bit more then, Robert. I mean, Stephen mentioned researchers and the like. I imagine you have a bug bounty program too, where you reward people, white hat hackers, from discovering vulnerabilities.
I think for us, with our bug bounty, it tends more towards the consumer-focused products that we have, like power tools or dishwashers or something like that. For the automotive ones, it tends to go more through an OEM, but we do have a PCERT webpage where you can submit that. There's a policy that explains that if you act in good faith, that we're not going to do a lawsuit or something like that. That's, I think, a few years ago that you didn't really have that in the industry. And I think that now most companies have that set up where they have a friendly relationship with security researchers, and we learn a lot from there, and participate at DEF CON or GERCON or some of these other conventions and try to interact with them a little bit, see what they're thinking, and also with the more academic conferences to interact with the researchers that are working on it as well.
Al, how about General Motors? You guys have a bug bounty program?
Absolutely. It's referred to as a vulnerability disclosure program, not always with a bounty associated with it, but just like these gentlemen described, it's the appreciation for that white hat hacker and the research that's out there is fantastic. And it's important to have a very positive relationship with these individuals, because they're doing us a great service by bringing these potential vulnerabilities, which we need to confirm whether or not they're exploitable and if there's risk involved in driving change. But certainly, if there's a vulnerability that's brought to us and we've been given the opportunity to address it before it's published broadly, that's a positive for all of us. So those researchers are very important, and our vulnerability disclosure program with HackerOne is very important to us and reaps benefit for us.
My understanding is a lot of these researchers, they're not in it for the money necessarily,
exactly.
Right? It's in some cases you pay pretty good rewards, right? In other cases it's maybe a couple of $100 or something.
We have paid, but you're exactly right. It's the recognition, it's the regard, and it's the opportunity to deal with colleagues, industry experts, working with the research teams. Is a very strong relationship. We also work with universities. We work with a number of companies, third parties, that help us in our testing, that help us in a variety of ways. So the strength in numbers concept is very much leveraged as we execute our security principles.
Stephen, you mentioned dealers too. What role do they play in this cybersecurity?
Dealers are the frontline customer service aspect from the sales process, service, and parts. So, they're one extension in our business. And, when you have an issue with your vehicle, that's typically where you go first, right? Whatever's happening. And not everything is a cyber incident, and most are not, but it is one channel that does get back to us and we can investigate through.
So Robert, talk a little bit more about the Auto ISAC in the sense of how well are companies in the industry participating in it? And are you really feeling like you're getting good things out of it?
So I've been involved with the global task force and chairing their outreach into Europe for the past 2 years. And that's one, I think that they're a little bit behind us in getting an ISAC set up, and we have an executive director that just started a few months ago there in Germany. And I think that we've gotten a good level of trust where we can share about our processes, and we've, I think, built relationships with, from a supplier perspective, with most of our OEMs, where we talk about, say, the big level problems, and then also some specific detailed related problems. And I would say that it's, as we're developing these, that it helps us a lot to be able to have this connection where we can chat about, are you sure you want to do it this way, or maybe not that way? And in a friendly environment, it's much better than just getting a spec and say, meet my spec, and then not be aware of some of the ramifications on that. So I would say that we've had good progress sharing with our customers and also with our suppliers and competitors as well.
Al, how do you see it? I mean, how long has the Auto ISAC been around, and how much has it grown in that time?
The Auto ISAC has been around for a number of years, but I will say that as far as the growth over time and the trust, that trust grows with the sharing. So the more that we work together and share together, the trust continues to grow, and then the more we share. And so it builds on itself, and it's growth that I think we've seen in recent times, for sure, because we are sharing, and we've demonstrated in particular instances where we've shared together, where we've kind of opened the books to give a breakdown of, you know, what was root cause and what actions were taken, and how do you respond, and being able to share that information. And then we can take that example and run our playbooks to determine, you know, how we would have reacted as an OEM to make sure that we're covered as well. So the more we share, the better we share, and I think we're growing in that trust.
All sounds pretty good. Are there other things the Auto ISAC should be doing?
So we're involved with a number of government agencies and things like that, and there is a maturity that comes with cybersecurity. We're not at the end of that path, nor do I think we ever will be, but we're definitely better than we were several years ago, and we're making progress every year, every step of the way as we go through sharing. So there's things like supply chain, been a big problem for many in not only automotive but elsewhere. So we're tackling these issues and taking a look to work through that with all the others in different industries as well.
Does the auto industry need new technology in this, or is it more ISAC, more collaboration, more processes?
So from a cybersecurity perspective, we leverage controls that some were provided by the Department of Defense and other national type agencies. So it's not that the control we're using is secret or proprietary. Realistically, when you look at cryptography, what's the secret piece is your key. Your key. The lock is there, and you put it on, right? So I think that sharing is good because it's not a competitive thing. It keeps us here and moving forward for the time to come.
Robert, same thing. Do we need new technology, or it's processes and the Auto ISAC sharing?
I would say that the car from 2030 will look very different from a car from 2021. So as we're getting more connected and more leverage in our what the products or the modules can do in the car, that it is new technology that we're developing to support it. But as Steve had said, that the basic tools that we're using are understood. It's the application of them. Instead of having a big computer, you have a small microcontroller inside your airbag or braking controller that you're trying to put security into something that's very different than putting it into your PC. And I think as we've been doing like security awareness training within our company, that we've seen that security really touches every aspect, and it's not just like a don't click on your email saying you want an electric Hummer, and but it's really for the products that we have, that do you from the selling, when we're talking with our customers, to product development and to the manufacturing, it touches everything.
So from the other perspective, the vehicle is evolving, right? With electric vehicle, we're now starting to get rid of fossil fuel, gas tanks, things like that. Those were protected more with physical controls, vents and things like that. As we move to autonomous vehicles, we're now starting to talk about removing the steering wheel, which is physically connected to the front tires or the turnable wheels, and the brake pedal, because we're removing the human from actually moving the vehicle. So more electronic signals are being sent, and we need to secure those effectively, and we are. We're working through that. Like I said, we start at concept, and as these concepts evolve and come to fruition, the security is applied during the design and requirements phases.
Absolutely. It's the market that is driving this, that's demanding this. So our customers want to be connected. We're driving technologies, and our GM vision is zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion.
And maybe you got to add another zero cyber hacks.
we need to develop new technologies that do require evolved security controls as well, just as Steve and Bob mentioned.
Real good. I'm afraid with that, we're going to have to wrap it up. Al Adams from General Motors, Robert Kaster from Bosch, and Stephen McKnight from Stellantis, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed where the auto industry stands with cybersecurity.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Autoline This Week partnered with the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit to produce this episode.